Here is a goal that once seemed impossible. The restored Roman Empire, a power that once again rules the world. The road to this goal was paid for with blood and risky decisions. I began as a two-province Byzantium, a state on the brink of collapse. I survived internal purges, defeated Egypt and revived the Eastern Empire. But that was only the beginning. My legion stormed into North Africa, established bloody footholds in Iberia and southern France. We tore every meter of land from the greatest powers of Europe. Today, the Byzantine armies march into the final battle. Against me will stand not only alliances of all Europe, but also nature itself, sending plague, famine and internal rebellions. The economy barely withstood the costs of war and crises are mounting. Yes, the road to the empire is not easy, but no one said it would be impossible. Greetings imperialist, Lucas here, who has hot promotions for you on ENEBA that last throughout the entire month of February. All codes are in the description. For them to work, you need to enter through my link. Even before we begin, I have a question for you. Which country should I play after finishing the Byzantine campaign? Patch 1.1 is just around the corner. It has been in beta for a few days now and promises major changes. Write your suggestion in the comments. I'll choose either an interesting idea or the most liked one. Returning to the game, the situation is that I'm still missing a few locations. Not many. And I won't hide it, I'd like to acquire all the bonuses I get from Rome as quickly as possible in order to continue the playthrough. But it probably won't make much sense because the new patch is already just around the corner. The diplomatic situation is such that more wars are awaiting me soon, with Castile. And the list of additional countries I need to wage wars against is really very long. At this point, antagonism is definitely just a number. For now, the economy is holding up quite well and is withstanding the strains caused by wars, although a slowdown is clearly visible. Court costs and the costs of my army are my two largest expenses, and they are slowing down my development. As for rebellions, things are mediocre here. Basically, every year there is some minor rebellion and every 10 years a larger one, which I don't fully understand because the population is generally satisfied. However, the biggest problem lies ahead of me, because the age of reformation is coming to an end, and in the age of absolutism, my vassals will become much more disloyal. The upside is that I'll be able to conquer faster on my own. Plus, that technology I'll talk more about later will appear. I am also lacking a sensible casus belli, because cleansing heresy is a weak one, and I mostly have to rely on the parliamentary casus belli. And that realistically allows me to conquer only 2 countries at a time. At least for now, because later these conquests will speed up significantly. For now, my goal is to prevent the greatest powers from uniting against me all at once. But let's discuss my army, because things are quite interesting here. I have one army that I use to fight battles, because it has a comparable number of cannons and infantry. Cavalry at this stage is already useless. All my remaining armies are essentially infantry plus cannons, but only in numbers needed exclusively to capture successive fortresses. These armies are divided into smaller units in order to suffer as few losses as possible due to attrition. The larger the army, the more food it needs, and having such smaller armies allows me to supply them locally without the need for additional supply trains. As for my fleet, there are no major changes here. One large transport fleet with a strong escort of heavy ships. The most important thing is not to forget to rebalance the fleets after every battle. The Mediterranean Sea is secured for me by caravels and heavy ships. Thanks to this, my naval presence in these waters is quite solid. Let's now move on to my newly conquered colonies in France as well as Iberia. From a tax perspective, these locations are worthless, because control here is 0. That's why I'll be using my favorite tactic to increase demand and maximize basic resources. That is, I demolish most towns and cities, leaving only the most populous ones, provided separatism allows me to do so. I want the goods produced here in the RGOs to be in the largest possible quantities and to flow into my Byzantine central market, because this is where production will take place, and manufactured goods will be sent to my colony. And this is precisely the main reason why I don't demolish all towns and cities. I build all utility buildings and all trade-related buildings in them, so that goods from Byzantium have guaranteed buyers. Because soon it may happen that I simply won't have anyone left to trade with. At the end of 1619, the time came for a quick match, which was the war with Castile. Of course, for the capital. Or no, actually not. To be precise, I will declare war over the old Castilian capital. Unfortunately, I don't have a land border with the location where the current capital is, so I wouldn't be able to demand it. The old capital, however, has a very high base tax. That's why I can safely use the threaten war option, because I know Castile will not agree to hand over that location to me. And naturally I can do it because it's surrounded by my provinces, so the time for war has come, and I'll show it to you right away. Look, every province has minus 25%. The best part is that this cost also applies to allies, but I didn't call them in separately, so their base cost is increased by 100% anyway. I'm curious whether Paradox will nerf this in future patches. I can only see one tiny problem here that I didn't anticipate. What is Hungary doing here? Never mind, I'll crush them anyway. I immediately cross the border into Castile. I want to capture those border forts as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, I was forced to send 2 armies to the border with the Pope, because Hungary as well as the Pope may come from somewhere around there. By sea, I transported 2 armies to my Balkan border with Hungary. This army has one goal: to hunt enemy armies, and not to capture forts. Those must fall first in Spain, stormed by my brave soldiers who die for my glory, but only on the Castilian front. On the others, I allow slow sieges. And that's not at all because of low manpower reserves. What's also important is to replenish the garrisons of captured forts. I don't know why, but the game often automatically disables this option. At this stage, artillery does the job anyway. Smashing walls, I quickly capture successive forts, but to speed everything up, we storm them, because the clock is ticking. In this, as in every other war, the most important thing is to capture the enemy capital as quickly as possible. Thanks to that, there is no chance the war will stall, because there will be no enemy actions against any country. Second, I capture the war goal as quickly as possible. The faster I take it, the faster my war score starts ticking in my favor. And now comes the best part of every war, absolutely wrecking the enemy armies who are being mowed down by my artillery. It's beautiful. Look at those numbers dropping. Every one of those numbers is one fewer Spaniard or Portuguese. The Byzantine army has no equal. After 2 years, the Castilian armies were destroyed and the forts captured. This army stays in the area to guard the conquered territories, and I move the remaining 3 to the papal front, because the number of forts here is... Well, unfortunately my Hannibal maneuver didn't work out because I forgot that elephants are not cannons. And dragging artillery through the Alps in December is quite difficult. I also lost several thousand soldiers on that march. Therefore, I decided to use my naval dominance and carry out a smash and grab operation on the Milanese bank, simply to knock that country out of the war for as much money as possible. After Milan, I wanted to deal with the papacy, but here I actually made a mistake, because I forgot that I hadn't declared war on that country separately. And for those Italian provinces, I'm basically paying like for Italian pizza in a restaurant these days for 3 people. Meaning I'm massively overpaying. So in the end, I take money and war reparations. Alright, I also took 2 provinces to go. Just before ending the war with Spain, I was able to hold an Orthodox synod, which further reduces province cost by 10%, and now something for those people who say that you can't really conquer in this game and that conquests are small. Look how much I took in this war, practically 2/3 of Castile, 145 provinces at once. So much antagonism that I'm not even going to count it anymore. Sigh, and now comes dealing with this whole mess. At least the good thing is that Castile stops being the main target of wars. I'll nibble at it little by little. For now, however, I'm deleting forts, which is incredibly stupid. But thanks to that, it will be much easier to deal with rebellions in this region. Because somehow, it always happens that once a rebellion breaks out, it captures all the forts. Well, or most of them. And there we go. Empty Iberia. Now I have just under 3 years left to prepare for the next war with France. That's why I'll speed up the process of annexing my vassal. And I'm doing it in the dumbest way possible. Yes, you see correctly, I'm deleting all cities and towns. Before there were this many, now most cities are gone. And just like that, I shortened it by about 7 years. And the best part is that this doesn't affect relations with the vassal in any way, even though I just razed most of his cities to the ground. Paradox level game immersion. I want to integrate these vassals from this region as quickly as possible, turn their territories into villages and collect as many local resources as I can. There's really a lot of good food and cotton here. I have this feeling that the market in Constantinople might run into food problems, and my basic textile mills will need cotton as well. In Europa Universalis 5, dealing with rebellions is also very important, or rather making sure they don't reach 95%, because then for some reason you can't declare war. I really don't understand why having a rebellion in your country prevents you from waging wars. But if you need to deal with a rebellion, we can suppress it using the cabinet action. I'm also building all kinds of buildings in my colonies to increase the flow of goods. I'm also modernizing my trade fleet. Heavy war galleons are exactly what I need. I build my trade fleets the same way as before, 30 trade ships and 5 heavy ships as escorts. Except that these basically tripled the cost of my fleet. And I send each of these new fleets to patrol a single sea zone. That's when it's most effective. Periods of relative calm, though I still have individual rebellions, I used to upgrade my buildings to level 2. Thanks to that, they'll be more efficient, but only once I've built a really large number of them. And now a pro tip for you: the easiest way is simply to find type 1 buildings, go into them, and upgrade all of them. Since I already have over a dozen markets, I also need to greatly increase the flow of goods between those markets, so I'm constantly adding additional markets as well. And I was clicking away happily like this until the year 26, when I demanded Paris from France, but that wasn't the worst war. My visit to France is meant to be a visit to Paris. And yes, I've heard many times that France is a beautiful country. Nonsense. It's pain and suffering. Have I already mentioned how much I hate conquering France in this game? There's a fort on top of a fort. How can they afford this? And while for an average tourist this might be a nice sightseeing trip, for my armies it was not a pleasant experience at all. Capturing each of these fortresses required fighting really tough battles with the French beforehand. Their armies turned out to be incredibly formidable. For the first time in a long while, the Byzantine armies tasted defeat, and victories came at the cost of heavy losses. Still, the final victory was mine, and France together with its allies suffered almost 4 times as many casualties. Wait, what is the Pope doing here? Never mind, even divine intervention didn't help the French in this war, yet despite everything I still had long months of further sieges ahead of me. I just can't take it anymore, I'm literally turning on the automation and letting it run on its own. But then Hungarian intervention changes the situation. Especially since when it comes to forts, they're catching up to the French. Let the Bohemia join this war as well. Unfortunately, the worst part is that I actually had a period of peace with Hungary. And now that counter is going to reset. I used the prolonged war to improve relations with both the Bohemia and the British. After 3 years of heavy fortress sieges, I captured 1/4 of what remained of France. The worst part, however, was that this was the region with relatively few forts, and I'll have to conquer the rest all over again. And just at the moment when my armies were happily returning to the newly conquered territory, and I started calmly dismantling the forts, a civil war broke out. And of course, right in all those newly conquered lands, more precisely, a gigantic heretical revolt. Which completely surprised me, since I tolerate other religions in my country, and now I have to retake those forts again. What did I ever do to you? Luckily, my armies were already on the spot, so I sent them into battle immediately. In Iberia, the situation was clear. I had dismantled all the forts there, so I began carpet sieging, which allowed me to end the rebellion fairly quickly. Still, it delayed my plans a bit, so 2 years later, I fought a quick war with the Iberian states, aiming to once again cut their capitals off from the rest of their countries. I even took Portugal's entire coastline, which forced their capital to be moved to Africa once again. In 10 years, I conquered 300 more new locations for the glory of the empire. Ahead of me remained wars with the big three: France, Hungary, and Great Britain. What didn't make things any easier was that as a result of the rebellion, I lost some locations in Mesopotamia, and that the Bohemia finally joined the coalition as well. From that point on, my diplomatic efforts stopped making any sense, so I rolled them all back, and the only diplomatic option left to me was war. But before I move on to the next wars, I have a few years of peace ahead of me, during which all members of my cabinet will focus on establishing Byzantine administration in the colonies. The colonies also began to cause me more problems, because food prices on local markets started to rise. For some reason, separatist aspirations in North Africa were still strong, even though my administration is operating quite efficiently in those areas. I seriously don't understand this mechanic. The tooltip explicitly states that separatism occurs only in non-incorporated territories. These are incorporated. With technological progress, I began upgrading further sectors of my economy, focusing mainly on the market in Constantinople. Unfortunately, I still had a very large number of backward level 1 buildings, because I didn't have the funds to upgrade them. In the year 1637, a great moment arrived: the age of absolutism and the choice of ideas. And unfortunately, just as I expected, most of my vassals became disloyal. And ahead of me was also a royal court rebellion and a struggle for power. which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But before we talk about the downfall, let's talk about ideas. In short, military ideas are once again practically useless. If I were a colonial state, and no, these aren't real colonies that I'm conquering, I just call them that for role-playing purposes, I would definitely choose diplomatic development. I'll just add that subject opinions are not the same as liberty desire. Antagonism, useless to me as well. The entire strength of these ideas lies in increased diplomatic reputation, trade capacity and trade efficiency. But the administrative path, here there are plenty of gems, especially if the campaign were to last until the end of the game, that is until 1821. Yes, this is the path my empire followed. And practically right away in Heliopolis, a scientific revolution began, that is in Egypt. This era is also the choice of Byzantium's future path, absolutism or liberalism. I know perfectly well which path I will follow, because liberalism will give me an incredible boost to conquest. In EU5, absolutism is terrible when it comes to conquest. It is the age of absolutism that gives you the most important bonuses to conquering your neighbors. However, the path of liberalism, if combined with appropriate government reforms, provides truly powerful tools. And that's even before oil became fashionable. Estate satisfaction means more happy population. Increased cultural capacity means more accepted cultures and even more happy population. But the real power lies here, in the required support for parliamentary actions, which will significantly reduce the cost of those actions in the future, which will allow me to fabricate claims faster than Trump does. Yes, liberalism is beautiful in this game. My empire also established warm relations with many nations. Of course, not those in Europe, but those separated from us by a vast ocean, which allows me to bring many unique and luxury goods into the empire that previously had to be imported from far away. And yes, instead of wine, I can plant a tobacco plantation, which may be very profitable in the future. Now I just need to rebuild all the RGOs. I also introduced chili peppers to a larger number of locations. Unfortunately, potatoes and corn remain beyond my reach. And unfortunately, in the future, the lack of these two special resources will land me in serious trouble. I think France is a cursed country, because what happened during the next war with it nearly led to my downfall. This time I started the war with France at full throttle. With all my armies, I kicked in the doors of practically all the border fortresses. With my super secret agents, I infiltrated France. Thanks to that, I learned the positions of the enemy forces, which will allow me to spring my trap. As soon as the opponent tries to retake their fortresses, I launch a massive attack and destroy their army. Okay, maybe not destroy it, but either way, I inflict heavy losses on them. On the Hungarian front, I focus on holding the border. In the Mediterranean Sea, my fleet crushes a small Hungarian armada. Outdated caravels stood against mighty galleons. I won battle after battle. However, the real blow came from a direction I did not expect. The conflict between court and country began. During it, I must decide whether I will follow the path of absolutism and be the only one who matters, or whether I will loosen certain rules, which will calm social tensions in the country. And as I mentioned earlier, the path of liberalism is the one I want to follow, because it simply makes conquest easier. Unfortunately, because of these actions, my authority will be challenged. I had to cleverly balance between the estates, taking privileges away from some and granting them to others, which was terribly expensive. And combined with increasing expenditures on the court, this caused my budget to creak at the seams. So now I had to aim to end the war with France as quickly as possible, whose armies had fortunately been shattered earlier. There is literally nothing here. So for the sake of my mental well-being, I sent the armies to automatically siege region by region. Thanks to this, I figured out what exactly this modifier reducing war score costs does. That is, at least I think I know what it does. Because at the moment when I occupy this area, by the end of this war I can practically take over 2/3 of France, that is over 250 locations. Which means that my next major opponent will not be all that difficult to conquer. Although these may be one of my hardest wars because I will be facing a great coalition. Oh no, the Little Ice Age has begun. So yes, two major problems hit my Byzantine Empire at once. Solving the crisis of famine and food production, as well as balancing estate privileges in such a way that they do not rebel and in the end grant me more power. Initially, I increased state spending on stability. I needed to calm the mood, money could wait. I also had to deal with many ongoing issues that didn't improve the state's situation at all. You could say I was simply limiting losses. In some of my provinces I had really serious food shortages. And this was even before the worst penalties to food production hit me. Because those actually apply for now only to the few red locations. And here it's yellow. Although I must admit that the numbers don't add up here and nothing makes sense to me, like in my annual tax return. But yes, I made a series of investments, irrigation or farms, which very quickly allowed me to cut food expenses by half. After a few years I reached almost maximum liberal values. I also ensured very high support from all my estates, which allowed me to end the conflict with the court and push the country even further toward the liberal values, unfortunately at a high cost. In the same period, I developed better scientific methods that sped up research. There are tons of cool, really cool technologies here. It's hard to choose anything. I went for iron first, because you can never have too much of that resource. Another issue is new government reforms and the type of parliament, because a new type of parliament will also reduce those costs. Faster integration of conquered locations will certainly speed up my conquests. Increasing passive legitimacy will improve my budget. Manufactories technology will give me more RGOs. Here I immediately want more lead, because I have very large production of books and paper and this resource is needed there. And honestly speaking, in all of Europe there really isn't much of it. However, this is not the most valuable technology from manufactories. This building is a real gold mines, which you can see on this location map. Here is my immensely powerful, wealthy Constantinople, and here is some Adrianopolis, where I have only 23 building levels that generate almost 400 income net. So if you're having economic problems, invent this building. Besides, manufactories contain tons of upgrades up to level 3. And I won't hide the fact that inventing these new manufactories is exactly what my Byzantium needs to stop suffocating economically. The mint will also come in handy, the absolute court to increase crown power, and an additional cabinet member. However, these were not the most important technologies because I completely missed the most important one. In the section concerning the scientific revolution, there is a special option for the cabinet, integrating entire areas instead of provinces. Areas, provinces, never mind. Meanwhile, my food expenditures were becoming increasingly important and larger. The main problem, however, was the price of food, not its lack. Therefore, now I will literally click through all markets and build farms and irrigation wherever possible until the price reaches the lowest possible level. I must admit that managing a large population is problematic, and ahead of me now lies a major coalition war. However, Hungary is not my main target here, at least not right now. I leave 2 armies to guard my borders. My main target is those irritating Iberian states. The worst part of all this is simply transporting troops from one side of the empire to the other. From the Hungarian capital, I will bring back a lot of souvenirs. And as a result of this surprisingly easy war, I take a fairly large chunk of Hungary. Most importantly, however, is getting right next to the Hungarian capital. It's looking better and better. At this point, I'm missing only 800 provinces. However, increasingly stranger countries are joining the coalition. I was even threatened by the possibility that India might join the coalition. Never mind. The next country I strike is of course the heart of the former empire, the Italian boot, naturally using my best casus belli, Greenland or war. And unfortunately, once again I fought Hungary, and here I won't hide that I'll use a tip from one of my viewers, thank you very much, Alex, and I'll get rid of Hungary by giving them access through my strait. Between us, it's almost like an exploit, and Paradox really should nerf it. However, what pleased me the most in this war was that Naples practically has no forts. But those are upgraded forts. No! The situation was further complicated by isolated rebellions, but I didn't worry about that. I immediately took Sicily and moved on, fighting a few more battles with the Neapolitan army. And I must admit that I didn't always choose favorable terrain. Despite this, the Byzantine armies were victorious. As a result of the peace treaty, I captured most of Naples, basically by capturing most of Italy. I wonder if once I finish my conquests, all countries in the world will have 1000 antagonism. Theory disproven, China has 0. Nevertheless, I decided to immediately attack Milan and its only ally, that is the remnants of Castile. Despite the fact that Milan has quite a lot of forts, most of them are level 2, so they fall very quickly. In fact, I am capturing those Castilian forts more slowly. In the meantime, I also discovered something related to the fact that I ultimately lose a war when I grant a given country tariff relief. It turned out that this game has a revanchism mechanic and I have 0 interest loans. Infinite money, baby. Okay, fine, you have to repay those loans, so there's no infinite money. But they're really low interest. 0. Those interests are downright ridiculous, and I use them immediately. Returning to Milan, I conquer practically the entire country in a single war. In the end, only the capital remained. plus some vassal, but that doesn't count. Taking advantage of the fact that I can now literally print money, I changed the parliamentary system to a constitutional parliament. Although my imperial little heart was tempted by an autocratic parliament, thanks to this I can now very cheaply push parliamentary claims against all remaining countries, or reform the country very quickly. I'm coming. At first, however, calmly, 2 wars at once, and not with very large countries. But unfortunately, at the moment when I was really close to forming the Roman Empire, a new plague struck, consuming over 5 million Byzantine citizens. Unfortunately, because of this, my economy took a very deep dive. The tax base dropped by several thousand. Unfortunately, it took me as many as 5 years to recover from this crisis. I also used this period to expand the army. I modernized the pikemen units, they are now musketeers. Unfortunately, I'm still using old artillery, so I built up some more of it. I intend to use it in the invasion of the islands. Honestly, I'm already a bit tired of waiting. Look at the map, this is no time for diplomacy. I'm planning to open not 1, not 2, but 3 to 4 fronts at the same time. As an appetizer comes France, as the main course Great Britain, and as the cherry on top Hungary. These are not friendly visits, these are hostile takeovers. I demand their capitals. Of course, they won't hand them over peacefully, so I'll take them by force. What you're seeing is the definition of a world war in the early modern era. Simply put, the south of Europe is marching north, and honestly, I'm leaving only the order alone. For now. My strategy is simple. Even though Great Britain is the main course, I'll focus first on the appetizer and the dessert. Great Britain will come last. The full power of my legions will first concentrate on the continent. Do I foresee any problems? Definitely not. Only, as usual, it's the perfect moment for more rebellions. Oh my god, conquering Bohemia in the future will be a joke if this is what it's going to look like. An option for automatic assault would be useful, because manually clicking it over and over again, when the outcome of the siege and assault is certain, is pure drudgery. Alright, but let's leave the continent. Look at the British Isles. Surprising, isn't it? I landed there as if on vacation. British fortresses are simply a ruin. First level, I walk in like I own the place. And do you know what I found in London? Not an army. Souvenirs. I looted more treasures there than anywhere else. In Constantinople, I now have over 300 works of art. And I must admit, they're starting to give tangible bonuses. Since I infiltrated the administration, I can see that the island is empty, so I ordered a classic carpet siege. A carpet siege to occupy everything already. The first truce, surprisingly, I start with Great Britain. Unfortunately, I take much less territory than I wanted, because that stupid modifier for splitting a country is being applied, even when it makes no sense. From the French, I carve out all those annoying mountain peaks. Yes, I still remember those fights in the Pyrenees and the Alps, so you probably remember the pain I had there. And Hungary, I had to occupy practically the entire country to force them to give up what I wanted. 87% war score is my record against such a major power. But the peace deal is satisfying and this country has just ceased to exist as a threat. Alright, but wars and rebellions are one thing. Now it's time to take care of the economy. Although there will definitely be one more war ahead of me, this building is absolutely overpowered. However, for it to work at its best, I need to build it in a good province, and it so happens that I have one with both wood and dice in one place. And I will build a gigantic production hub here. I can place 66 levels of this manufactory here, but of course I first expanded the construction center and built new roads to the capital to maximize control, market access as well. And yes, this will be the most valuable good in my empire anyway. But seriously, please, someone add an option for mass deletion of forts, because after every conquest I have thousands of clicks just to remove these unnecessary ruins. I am still investing in farms and irrigation in newly conquered territories because people have to eat. The Little Ice Age was still ongoing. Now Georgia. And I must admit, this is hell. Not because of the enemy army, but because of the terrain. Narrow passes, winter, attrition, my legions were freezing in place. I also have to admit that Georgia seems like a fascinating country to play defensively. Those mountain valleys are incredible, but the end justifies the means. I cut this country off from the sea and take over the key routes, it's done. I have all the required locations and all the key conditions fulfilled. Time for Renovatio Imperii, time to restore the Roman Empire. Except, I can't create the Roman Empire because the game is bugged, and that label is awful anyway. But fortunately, there is a mod that saved the situation. I click and I become Rome, with an awful label. Seriously, Paradox should improve the labels in this game, and honestly, I really like the Empire. However, there are a few problems. The capital moved to Rome, and the language changed to Latin instead of Greek. In my opinion, Constantinople was a better capital location. But well, of imperialists, it worked, the goal was achieved. If after all this chaos of wars on every front you feel like a calmer campaign, I recommend this episode. Along the way, you'll also learn very good methods for building economic power.